The house is quiet, but the phone is buzzing. You scroll past a dozen faces, smiling at strangers, wondering why the person in the room feels far away. It's a feeling we know well, whether you're a man sitting in a car after work or a woman lying awake replaying a conversation that didn't go as planned. We've all become experts at keeping the world at arm's length, building walls that keep us safe but also keep us lonely. We've mastered the solo life, finding comfort in routines that become a quiet cage. You might feel you're failing at intimacy or pushed away by impossible demands. Both feelings are real, and both matter here. We're weaving human empathy with AI precision to untangle this knot, not to fix you, but to help us see the pattern. We aim to move from isolation to understanding, defense to dialogue. We're holding space for every story and spark of hope. We're looking at this together, through a lens that's both human heart and AI mind. We're not here to point fingers or tell you who's right. We're just trying to understand why we've grown so good at surviving alone, yet so unsure how to belong together again. This isn't a lecture, it's a quiet conversation about the ache we all carry and the hope that we can find our way back to each other. There's a wound here, and it's not about blame. It's about habits we picked up along the way that stopped us from reaching out. We want to explore that gently, with honesty and care, because healing starts when we stop judging and start listening. So, take a breath. You're safe here. Let's walk through this together, one step at a time, looking for the light in the cracks. So here we are, standing at the edge of a quiet mystery. We've built lives where independence is a badge of honor, yet something feels hollow when the house is too still. The central question isn't about who failed whom, it's about what happened to the bridge between us. Why have we become so expert at surviving on our own, while the art of belonging together feels like a language we're slowly forgetting? We see the drift in the way we scroll past connection, in the defenses we raise before we even speak, in the fear that vulnerability might be a trap rather than an invitation. This isn't a failure of character, it's a response to a world that often rewards armor over openness. Both men and women carry the weight of expectations that push us toward isolation, whether it's the pressure to be unshakable or the exhaustion of emotional labor that leaves no room for mutual ease. The wound isn't malice, it's a misalignment. We're reaching for safety, but our signals are crossed. Often, what looks like rejection is just fear wearing a mask. The deeper inquiry is about the courage it takes to lower the drawbridge. How do we move from survival to shared life without demanding perfection from ourselves or each other? Healing begins when we recognize that the distance between us isn't a wall, but a gap we can close by stepping forward, not by pointing fingers. We offer this perspective not as a cure, but as a compass. The path back starts with acknowledging that we are all navigating the same storm, just from different boats. If the weight feels too heavy to carry alone, please remember that professional support is a valid and strong step toward peace. Let's look at how we can rebuild that trust, gently and without blame. What the data shows: the architecture of solitude. To understand our current distance, we must look at the quiet shifts in where we actually live. The physical layout of American life has changed steadily. Over the last century, one-person households grew from just 7.7% of all homes in 1940 to 27.6% by 2020. That rise shows we learned to build independent lives. Independence is not a flaw. It is a survival skill many of us had to master. Yet among adults 65 and older, the trend is gently reversing, dropping from 29% living alone in 1990 to 26% in 2023. Much of that shift comes from women, whose solo living rates fell from 38% to 31%, quietly pulling the national average down. Even so, older women still navigate solo homes more often than older men, sitting at 31% compared to 19%. As we age further, solitude naturally deepens, with those 85 and older living alone at 38%, while the 65 to 84 group rests at 24%. These figures do not measure failure, they map adaptation. The real wound is not that we chose to stand alone, but that we forgot how to weave our separate lives back together without losing ourselves. Healing begins when we stop treating solo living as a deficit and start seeing it as a foundation. We can honor the strength it took to survive independently, while gently practicing the art of opening our doors again. Belonging does not require abandoning your autonomy. It simply asks that we leave room for shared meals, honest conversations, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone else understands the weight. When we recognize that both men and women have been carrying this load, we can finally lower our guard and start rebuilding trust, one gentle step at a time. WHA shows the partnership shift across generations. The landscape of partnership has shifted beneath our feet, shaping lives from youth to old age. In middle age, the gap is widening. Among adults ages 25 to 54, men are now more likely to be unpartnered than women, at 39% versus 36% in 2019, while both were 29% in 1990. This trend starts early. 25% of 40-year-olds in the U.S. had never been married in 2021, up from 6% in 1980. Yet, this doesn't mean the desire for connection has vanished. In fact, 95% of both men and women ages 70 or older have been married at some point in their lives. The difference lies in how we reach later life. For adults 75 and older, the path diverges sharply. Men are nearly twice as likely as women to live with a spouse, with 67% of men sharing a home with a partner compared to 35% of women. This gap reflects the reality of loss. Among adults 75 or older, 54% of women but only 20% of men were currently widowed. Consequently, women often navigate their final decades with more solitude, as about 43% of women aged 75 or older lived alone in 2022. Meanwhile, a quiet reversal is happening for men. The share of men ages 65 and older living alone rose from 15% in 1990 to 19% in 2023, signaling that more men are increasingly aging alone. These numbers paint a picture of distinct challenges: men facing a growing solitude in later years, and women carrying the weight of widowhood and independent living. Understanding these patterns helps us see that isolation isn't a personal failure, but a shared structural shift we're all navigating. What the data shows: loneliness and the support gap. When we look closer at the emotional landscape, the first thing that stands out is how much the pain of loneliness is shared. Research shows that roughly equal shares of U.S. men and women report feeling often lonely, at about 16% overall. This shows the ache for connection isn't gendered, it's a universal human need that's currently going unmet across the board. However, the texture of that loneliness shifts as we look at age. Among younger adults, the gap widens slightly. Data indicates that 25% of U.S. men aged 15 to 34 felt lonely a lot of the previous day, compared with 18% of young women. This suggests that for young men, the daily experience of isolation can be more acute, pointing to a specific vulnerability in early adulthood that deserves our attention. Where the paths diverge most clearly is in how we seek relief. Women are far more likely than men to turn to a friend for emotional support, with 54% doing so compared to just 38% of men. This isn't a character flaw on either side, it highlights a structural difference in our support networks. Women often have established channels for care, while men may find themselves standing at a door that's harder to knock on. The data describes the wound, but the direction forward lies in recognizing these patterns without judgment. For men, the challenge may be building the habit of reaching out, trusting that vulnerability can be met with welcome rather than withdrawal. For women, the strength of their networks is a resource that can also extend a hand to those who are quieter. Healing happens when we use what works for some to bridge the gap for others, creating a culture where asking for help feels safe for everyone. The roots: when connection became optional. We didn't wake up one day and decide to drift apart. The shift happened slowly, woven into the fabric of how we live. For decades, the cultural script told us that self-reliance was the highest virtue. If you needed no one, you were strong. If you leaned on others, you were vulnerable. This message didn't target one gender, it seeped into the water we all drink. Economic pressures reinforced this isolation. As work became more demanding and communities more fragmented, the energy required to maintain deep bonds felt like a luxury. We traded time together for survival, convincing ourselves that standing alone was safer than risking disappointment. The promise of independence offered a shield against heartbreak, but it also built walls around our hearts. We learned to manage our lives efficiently, Yet we lost the practice of leaning into the messy, unpredictable work of belonging. This current runs through both men and women, though it may wear different masks. Some retreat into achievement to prove their worth, while others overgive to avoid the risk of being truly seen. Both paths lead to the same quiet exhaustion. Healing starts when we recognize that independence was a survival strategy, not a destiny. We can honor the strength it took to get here while gently questioning whether that armor still serves us. The longing doesn't require losing ourselves. It asks us to trust that we are enough to be known. The path forward isn't about forcing closeness, but creating space where vulnerability is met with grace, allowing both men and women to lower their guards without fear. We move from surviving alone to thriving together by remembering that our need for connection is not a weakness, but the very thread that holds us whole. This is a gentle return to what we were always meant to do. Both sides held, the mirror of mutual longing. When we look closely, we see that the ache of disconnection doesn't fall on one side of the room, it echoes in both. Men and women carry different burdens, yet the weight of isolation presses on us all. For many men, the wound often looks like a silence they didn't choose, a pressure to stand alone that leaves them feeling unseen and unanchored. For many women, the hurt might manifest as an exhaustion from holding the emotional fabric together, only to find themselves drifting in a sea of expectations that leave little room for their own quiet needs. These are not accusations, they are reflections of a shared struggle. We often mistake their distance for rejection and our own withdrawal for strength, creating a cycle where both hearts starve for the same nourishment. We have been trained to armor up, to prioritize survival over vulnerability, and in doing so, we've both lost the language of belonging. The fault lies not in men or women, but in the patterns that taught us to protect ourselves at the cost of each other. True healing begins when we recognize that these parallel pains are mirrors, not weapons. Your deep loneliness is not a failure of character. It is a signal that your heart is still reaching for what matters. When we stop pointing fingers and start holding space for these distinct hurts, we create room for grace. We can gently acknowledge that the guardrails we built to keep safe have also kept us distant. The path forward isn't about fixing the other person. It's about lowering our own defenses and inviting connection without demand. We are all learning to belong again, stumbling through the same dark, hoping for the same light. By honoring the unique ways each of us has been wounded, we weave a stronger bridge back to one another, grounded in the quiet truth that we are all fighting the same lonely battle, just from different shores. Recognizing this shared humanity softens the edges of our defenses, making it easier to reach out with an open hand rather than a clenched fist. A direction to heal, rebuilding the bridge. How do we walk that bridge? It starts with the quiet courage to lower our shields, just an inch. For men, this might mean naming the vulnerability that feels dangerous, trusting that sharing a struggle invites genuine support rather than diminishing strength. For women, it might look like pausing the instinct to fix or manage, creating space for a partner to simply be. These aren't rules, they are invitations to test a new rhythm. Connection thrives in the mundane moments we often overlook. It's the shared silence that doesn't need filling, small acts of service offered without scorekeeping, and the willingness to ask, "How are you, really?" Then truly wait. We rebuild by treating each other as teammates in a world that often feels like an opponent. When we miss, and we will, we repair. A sincere apology, a gentle reset, a return to the conversation form, the mortar holding the bridge together. Remember, this path is perspective, not a prescription. As a hybrid voice drawing on social science and human empathy, we offer direction, not therapy. If the weight of isolation feels crushing or wounds run too deep, please seek a licensed professional. Real healing sometimes requires a safe room with a trained guide. But for the daily work of belonging, the tools are within reach. They live in the choice to see the person behind the posture, extending grace over blame, and believing we are all worthy of being known. The bridge is built one honest word, one open hand, one shared breath at a time. Let's return to that quiet image we began with, the sense of standing apart, skilled at keeping the storm at bay, but wondering why the silence feels so heavy. We've walked through the numbers and the narratives, tracing how we learn to survive when what we truly long for is to belong. But survival was never the finish line. It was just the shelter we built when the world felt unsafe. Now, the invitation is to step out of that shelter, not all at once, but inch by inch. The work of reconnection lives in the small, consistent choices. It's the text sent just to say, "I'm thinking of you." It's the pause before reacting, choosing curiosity over assumption. It's the courage to share a small truth, trusting that the person across from you, whether a partner, a friend, or a stranger, carries the same hopes and fears you do. For men and women alike, the armor we wear protects us, but it also keeps us cold. Healing happens when we find safe ways to set it down, just for a moment. This isn't about performance, it's about presence. When we show up as we are, we give others permission to do the same. That ripple of authenticity is how we rebuild the community we've lost. Every small act of kindness is a vote for a world where we belong together. You don't need to fix the whole world today. You just need to offer one open hand. Belonging is a practice, not a destination. It grows when we treat each other with grace, recognizing that we are all worthy of being known. Data maps the distance, your compassion bridges it. Take that step. Reach out. Listen. The bridge is waiting. You are ready. This episode was brought to you by a human writer and an AI collaborator, working side by side to help us find our way back to each other.